A warmer from the Evo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. We've got a great podcast for you, as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Rocco Miller. He does great work over at Bracketeer.org, the Field of 68's mid-major show, and so much more. We're going to be chatting it up with him about what we've all seen here in the first week of the season, some of these standout performances from these mid-major teams, and we'll take a look at a few games of intrigue that are standing out to him for this week in the final segment. Going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Monday, as we had some bank shots. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X question today, everything is Power Bet Better. That is BETR. They're making it easier to get into the game than ever before, as right now, if you utilize the promo code VSINPOD, that is VSINPOD, over at better.app, that is BETR.app, you'll get $10 free. No deposit required. Just sign up, make your picks, and you're ready for tip-off. And how about if we do tip off the show by taking a look at everything that we saw in a wild college basketball Sunday? Try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
Unfortunately, I did have to do this for the podcast to be up by midnight Pacific, 3 o'clock a.m. Eastern, so there is no way of knowing what happened in our random college basketball game in Hawaii, but it is very nice that we've got random college basketball games in Hawaii back in our lives, so that puts a smile on my face. And if you're an Indiana Hoosiers fan, this should put a smile on your face. 100-77. They completely land-based Marquette. As for Lamar Wilkerson, he stepped up in a big way with 23 points. It appears as though Tucker DeVries is pretty back in full force. 6 of 9. Very nice from three-point range. 27 points in this one. As for Marquette, they went 4 of 16 from three-point range. And for Marquette, you did have Chase Ross supply 19 points, 5 rebounds in this game, but Marquette also lost the turnover battle by a count of 15-8, so this was not a great showing for them. And for Marquette, they actually did win the rebound battle by a count of 39-34, but that's mainly because they were rebounding a lot of their own misses, while Indiana, they were just hitting those shots. And you did see, in terms of lighter fares, we really didn't have a lot of ranked teams in action, but Georgia looking very, very impressive here in the early goings. 120-81 all over Morehead State in this one. Morehead State actually was able to make 30 field goals in this game, and Morehead State held in there on the glass. They lose that battle 43-41, but for Georgia, they go 17 of 37 from three-point range. Marcus Millender off the bench, 1 3 of 3 from three-point range. Jeremiah Wilkerson, the transfer from Cal, he had 22 points off the bench. You had Justin Bailey supply 14 points. Blue Kane was able to give you 14, so I knew you had all these guys just absolutely firing all cylinders. So Georgia has been looking very impressive. We'll see what happens when the competition ratchets it up, but that said, now it's a nice showing from them. And then this was a good offensive showing from Seton. Cal State Northridge, they go on the road, one of the few road teams to be able to win a game thus far this season, mainly because we are currently in bye game season, but that said, they were able to get the job done 93-85 against North Dakota Fighting Hawks. Looks like they might be in for a little bit of a rough year, though. Grayson Ullman was able to give them 24 points, so yay barely there. And for Seton, Josiah Davis, he was able to supply that team with 25 points, so he did a nice job in that team being able to get the job done. You saw a harebrained game out there at Brown University. What can Brown do for you? Well, if you took the money line like myself, disappointing. Brown was up double figures in the second half, and then they got down double figures in the second half, clawed their way all the way back just to force overtime, and then in overtime, you had, I believe it was one of the TJs. I think that it was TJ Long that threw in there the layup, as he had 40 points and 13 rebounds in this game, as he does that at the buzzer in overtime to be able to force double overtime. Vermont from there is able to pull away in double overtime to be able to get the job done in that one. So one of the wilder games of the season. And for Brown, you do want to be noting that they are dealing with quite a few injuries right now. Landon Lewis, their top scorer from a season ago, their top returning scorer and their top returning rebounder, he was out of the fold, and had a few of those other starters be out as well. Northern Iowa, they get the job done against South Dakota State, this by a count of 65-58. Now, Northern Iowa, they were laying on the close right around about 10.5 points, so they were unable to cover the spread, but they looked very solid with regards to their defense. And for Northern Iowa, they they are back in full force in terms of playing a little bit more slowly, as you had Tristan Smith be their main guy in this one, 16 points. And for Northern Iowa, they actually shoot darn near 50% from the floor. They lost a rebound battle 39-23, but they did a nice job in terms of being able to make life miserable for South Dakota State from three-point range, as South Dakota State just 5 of 22 from three-point range. Joe Saylor, he went 3 of 7 from 3. The rest of the team, a nice hearty 2 of 15 from three-point range, so that was not necessarily savory for them. This was not savory for Loyola Chicago, as they have started out the year 1-2. North Texas at the buzzer, they get a 64-62 win over the Ramblers, as Dylan Arndt, he was able to get a layup to go at the buzzer, though it was really Deshaun Stevenson who was really able to get things going for North Texas. He had 23 points in this one. Will McClendon off the bench, the transfer from UCLA and San Jose State, he was able to supply 12 points. And for Loyola Chicago, they lost the first half 34-20. Just some cold shooting in general from Loyola Chicago. They go 18 of 55 from the floor, 5 of 26 from 3, lose that turnover battle 13-12, though they were able to get a good performance once again out of Justin Moore. He was able to give you more. Now, he gave you 5 turnovers, but did supply the team with a double-figure amount of points. And then off the bench, Cade Dodson was able to supply 11 points, but back-to-back losses for the Ramblers. Been a little bit of a rough start to the season for them. A solid start to the season for USC, as they absolutely pound Manhattan 114-83. The final has for USC. All sorts of firepower from three-point range, 8 of 21 from the outside, with Chad Baker-Mazara in his 500th year of college basketball. He did a nice job leading the way with 26 points. All 5 of the USC starters were able to break double figures, and for Manhattan, they actually did a nice job in terms of being able to play even up with the guards in the turnover battle 12-12, but line based it on the glass, as USC wins that rebound battle by a count of 55-32. And for Cornell, man, a little bit of a rough go of it out there in the state of Illinois, as Illinois State, they get a win, and they get a pretty good one by a count of 76-65, so they were able to get the cover, as well as for Cornell, held to just 32 points in the first half. Illinois State was a little bit rough with their defense last season, looking much improved there, and Tariq Coleman off the bench, 24 big points for Illinois State. Illinois State 7 of 19 from three-point range, and for Cornell, just cold from three-point range, 6 of 31 from the outside, and they also gave out 26 fouls, and Illinois State could have really pulled away had they not won 17 out of 33 from the free throw line, but still a very nice rock-solid win for them, and it was a rock-solid win for Oklahoma State, 87-63 the final. Texas A&M against lesser competition had really been rolling under the Bucky McMillan system, and for Bucky McMillan, he played a lot of different guys in this one. You had 9 different guys play at least 18 minutes, very clear that they're trying to be able to find their rotation, but for Texas A&M, 9 of 35 from three-point range. Meanwhile, for Oklahoma State, you had 2 guys off the bench. Coleman squared. Isaiah Coleman, 13 points. Christian Coleman, 16 points. They did a nice job of leading the way. Oklahoma State, by the way, only 7 of 26 from three-point range, but won that turnover battle by a count of 15-9, so that was really able to power them to victory. Also being powered to victory was West Virginia, 69-47 the final. West Virginia's played all 3 of their games to the under thus far, so the Russ Hodge system very much taking full hold, as for Lehigh, they actually go 7 of 21 from three-point range, and they go a nice hearty 9 of 25 on their two-point shots, and for Lehigh, they were laying based on the glass, 38-25. You had West Virginia win that battle, and Brennan Laurent, who followed Hodge on over from North Texas to West Virginia, 26 big points in this one, so he did a nice job powering his team to be able to get the job done, and this team is looking very improved. The Denver Pioneers, as a pretty nice size underdog, they go on the road, they get the job done against Montana State, this by a count of 75-73, as for Montana State, they close as about a 7.5 or so point favorite, and for Denver, this team is taken over by a D2 coach, I believe Tim Bragstater, hopefully I got the last name correct. He did a nice job bringing over some of his guys, as Jeremiah Burke, he was able to do a nice job supplying this team with 23 points. He was the main headliner in this one, and for Montana State, they go just 8 of 28 from three-point range. Denver didn't take a lot of threes, and Denver did lose this turnover battle 14-8, but Denver shot 58% from the floor, 5 of 10 from three-point range, so very nice win out of them. And then this was a very rock-solid win as well, as you had Arizona State be able to take it to Utah Tech, this by a count of 81-66 for Arizona State. They closed us only about 12.5 to 13-point favorite, so they were able to cover this one. As for Arizona State, main guy that was able to step up in this game, Mor Masam Diop, a true freshman who was able to give the team 15 points, 6 rebounds for Arizona State. They went 9 of 24 from 3, and Utah Tech very much relies upon the three-point shot. They go 9 of 30 from 3, and Utah Tech doubled up in the turnover department. 8 turnovers for Arizona State, 16 for Utah Tech, and Liberty looking pretty good against Florida Atlantic. 88-68, the final for Florida Atlantic. They went just 3 of 15 from three-point range. Cannon Carlisle, 8 points. They're going to need a little bit more of him. Devin Vanderpool was able to give the team 24 points, but nobody else really showed up. As for Liberty, they had all 5 of their starters score at least 9 points, and the guy that scored 9 is Zach Cleveland. He very nearly had a triple-double. 9 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 4 steals, so he completely stuffed the stat sheet. And for Liberty, 13 out of 28 from three-point range. Florida Atlantic was one of the worst teams at guarding the three-point arc in all of college basketball last season. And Clara State, even though they've got the passing of the torch from Nico Medved to Ali Faroukmanesh, they're getting off to a nice start this season. And we will be talking about the Mountain West and some of their struggles in a few minutes with Rocco Miller, but that's like Colorado State, no such issues thus far. They land based at Incarnate Word to start the season, then 97-74. They take down the Omaha Mavericks. 11 of 29 from three-point range for Colorado State as Kerry Booth, who comes on over from Notre Dame and Syracuse, double-double in this one, 13 points, 11 rebounds, and Kyle Jorgensen, one of the main holdovers from a season ago. He supplied the team with 25 points. Tony Osborne did have 24 for Omaha, but Omaha, they got completely plowed on the glass, losing that battle 43-21, so that was a little bit less than tremendous for them, and I am doing this currently as the Washington versus Baylor game starting to wrap up. Baylor looking to try to be able to cover that game. We shall see how that one goes. And then we did see Missouri get a nice winning cover over VMI. 106-68 final in this one as CJ Johnson, 31 of VMI's 68 points in this game. And you had for Missouri a nice performance from Anthony Robinson, 4 of 5 from three-point range, 20 points. Mark Mitchell, he had a double-double, 24 points, 10 rebounds. And the Missouri offense very much humming to begin the season. And we saw a lot of overaction in college basketball on Sunday and just overall for the season. It has been an overwhelming season with a lot of favorites being able to cover. Favorites are hitting at 55.4%, 169, 136, and 4 against the spread, with the over hitting at about 53.3%, 163 overs, 143 unders, and I believe we have gotten 3 pushes along the way if math serves me correct. And if you're taking a look just at what we've gotten on Sunday, this is excluding the Hawaii game and the Washington versus Baylor game. 16 overs to 13 unders with the favorites once again having themselves a nice day. 16, 12, and 1 against the spread. So that's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's where we're all getting trend-wise. And coming up next, how about if we do chat with our good friend Rocco Miller? He's all over the place. Bracketeer.org, the Field of 68, Basket Under Review. We're going to be chatting with him about what we all saw here in the first week of the season and turning forward to this week right here on Cusco Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the UC Family Podcast. Are you looking to get an inside edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cusco Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man as we've got Rocco Miller aboard. He does a tremendous job at so many different places. Bracketeer.org, Basket Under Review, the Field of 68's mid-major show along with Sean Paul. This man is a bit of everywhere. He does so all so well. I know that he has been dialed into this game all throughout the offseason. He, much like myself, very, very thankful that we've got actual games back in our lives, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Rocco Miller, his first and last name, and the number 8 altogether. And Rocco, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Greg, it's great to be on with you. Happy first week of basketball coming to a close. I'm sure we have lots to get into today.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it has been a wild first week of college basketball. And I want to get your thoughts on this because something that I've noticed from my perspective is that we've had a lot of high scoring games this far. And to call it what it is, we've had a lot of blowouts. And how much do you think that it's playing a role this year that a lot of these high major teams are really wanting to boost up their net rankings? Because unlike in past years where you might see the walk-ons come in the final few minutes of a blowout, it just feels like a lot of these teams are just putting their foot down to the pedal and they're going pedal to the metal.
That's just the way it is right now. I don't think it's great for the sport. I don't even think it's great for those programs if they want to, get some of the guys towards the end of the bench some development. But again, we're at a different period of time, so maybe it does kind of balance out, right? With a selection committee right now, based on last year and the last couple of years, your seed is very prevalent on your power numbers. So, whether you want it to be the net itself or you want it to be your Ken Palm, your Torvik, all of those things are on the selection committee's team sheet. So for these power conference teams that are, obviously all in it to get at large bids, once they're in the field, that makes a big difference. You could drop to an 8 or a 9 seed, or you can be a 5 or a 6 if you're kind of one of those middle of the pack teams that are safely in. But then your seeding is a lot of times just determined by what your quote unquote danger factor is. And, you and I understand that, whether you're beating FIU by 30 or by 15, I don't think it makes you any better or any worse. It's just a matter of your kind of athleticism and your depth. So maybe there's something to it when you look at it that way, but otherwise it's a little bit ridiculous. And that's what Nebraska did, for example. Just looking at one example, Duke, of course, isn't going to be too worried about their seed. They're probably a 1 or a 2, beating up on Western Carolina by 41, Minnesota beating Alcorn by 45. So there's some fun examples for you. Syracuse beating Delaware State by 40. I think it's a good question because these games are purposely scheduled just so they can go for that extra The net algorithm is telling these coaches that the net expects them to win by 32 and they can win by 45, like the example with Minnesota and Alcorn State. Then they've just increased their own power ranking kind of across the models, not just the net.
Yep, and I do think that that is something that we've been seeing a lot of the last few years, and that's really been standing out to me in the first week or so of the season, and we just have not really been able to see a lot of those underdogs be able to rise up, but where we have seen the underdogs be able to rise up, and we've talked a lot about this conference because I know you, Rocco, are a West Coast guy, much like myself. It just feels like it's been a rough year for the Mountain West. With UNLV losing that first game to UT Martin, I joked about this with you off air, but I mean, Boise State losing to a team based in a strip mall, they restored order over the weekend against Utah Valley. But when you lose to Hawaii Pacific, that's not necessarily the world's greatest look. And what have you made out of the fact that the Mountain West have had some bad losses, including that of Grand Canyon losing to Youngstown State as well, to throw that one in?
Yeah, well, I think, the Boise State loss in many respects, luckily for the Broncos, won't hurt.
That's one of the most funny things ever, because they lost to a D2 school, a school that is so far down that it actually doesn't hurt them. Meanwhile, if they had lost to a swag school, that would have completely killed their ratings.
Yeah, exactly. And I think going into these types of games, these non-Division I games, everybody on board knows that going in. So the way that they're coached and managed, Leon Rice may have not have done different rotations or substitutions if he knew it was something that was going to count against their quad record, their net ranking, their resume rankings, like all of those things. This result is not factored into. There is one of the 7 metrics that are listed on NCAA selection team sheets that does have a component, and that would be the Kevin Pogba KPI, which again, out of all 7 of them, that might be the one ranked 6th or 7th between that and the BPI, but they're on there. So his does calculate it as a loss to number 366 because there's 365 D1 teams.
I love how they just give every Division II team 366, by the way.
Right. Well, because with computer models, Greg, you have to have a component. You have to have a numeric component. So that's what he settled on. And I don't even know what the right answer is. I just think we're at a point where this has kind of been the case for a while, for several years. So these games get scheduled with that in mind. Like, we can empty our bench. We can take chances on things in this game without it counting against us, really. And so that's kind of the point of emphasis there. Obviously, losing to Hawaii Pacific is a big red flag for what's to come maybe the rest of the year, but they did bounce back and have a nice performance to beat a pretty good Utah Valley team handily by close to 20 yesterday, Saturday. So Boise did bounce back. We'll see what that means. I think in the case of Grand Canyon, I'm a little shocked They lost in that building against Youngstown State. Youngstown for me was one of the top two Horizon teams coming into the year. In fact, they're my regular season pick. So from Youngstown's perspective, I'm just blown away by them being able to go in and do that. I think they learned a lot by playing Pittsburgh opening night. They take a 15-point loss to Pittsburgh, come to Grand Canyon. You talk to a lot of these coaching staffs. It's all about your game-to-game adjustments. So they made some tweaks. They came in ready to go. They weren't worried about the environment. I think a lot of that freshness coming out of Pittsburgh kind of helped their psyche. From Grand Canyon's point of view, they're obviously breaking in a lot of new pieces. For their defense to allow Youngstown to put up 90, for them to allow 12 made three-pointers, over 50% shooting to the Penguins. There's a lot to be cleaned up defensively for the Lopes. Now, again, they've got some great offensive weapons, and I think long-term they're going to be dangerous. But that's the kind of loss where the league's really going to hurt from it because they're depending on Grand Canyon, I think, to be at least a top 5 team in the league. You could argue a top 3 team in the league. And then I think with the loss with UNLV, that was really interesting. UT Martin comes in there and just plays a great game, built a little lead there and really kind of owned the second half. It was one of those classic upsets where, we weren't sure if it would last in the first half. It was pretty much tied at halftime. And then the Skyhawks, with their 13 international players, an NCAA record, I don't even know how they're all communicating because they're from everywhere in the world. What a win for them. That's kind of the thing I would highlight. But I think for UNLV, still no Miles Che, a very important player. We know they're without their big man for 3 months. At least maybe he'll sit the whole year out. So they've got to figure out what they've got. But again, going back to my point about adjustments, Greg, UNLV, great job adjusting. I mean, they really had a refreshed mindset going into the Chattanooga game over the weekend, and they pulled it together and really impressively. And I know Chattanooga was on back-to-back nights, but winning that by 31, that's going to go a long ways for UNLV's numbers to make up for the UT Martin loss. And then the last loss was Fresno State. And I guess San Jose is also 0-2, but San Jose lost 2 tough road games at Utah and Santa Barbara. I think no harm in that. I think with the Fresno home loss to USC Upstate, that's a little embarrassing, but also encouraged by their bounce back, beating Long Beach by 20 their next time out. So again, I think in each of these examples, all the teams besides Grand Canyon have already bounced back. Obviously, Mountain West needs to stop the bleeding immediately. You only get about 6 weeks of these opportunities, and week 1 you would have to say is a little bit of a fail.
Yeah, it was certainly not great to say the least what happened there, and certainly it's going to be interesting to take a look at this UNLV team moving forward because, as you mentioned, deal with a whole bunch of injuries to begin the season. And I'm so glad that you did bring up the fact that they bounced back against Chattanooga because we had you on so much during the offseason talking about scheduling and how much these mid-majors sometimes get hurt by scheduling because I had to just bet against Chattanooga on Saturday because I was like, man, you're going from the great state of California in less than 24 hours and playing against UNLV on back-to-back nights. You're probably going to be dealing with a lot of travel just to get out to Las Vegas. And there have been some strange scheduling spots that I really think put some of these good mid-major teams, which Chattanooga, I think we both agree, very good mid-major team. We saw exactly what they were able to do last year. Coach Earl has done an amazing job, but when you put a school like Chattanooga in that sort of a spot, it's really hard for them to have success.
Yeah, it really is. They did it intentionally, so it was their own choice. Now, Chattanooga is the defending NIT champions, so them calling all over the country during scheduling, trying to get a game where they can get a paycheck for coming out was very difficult, right? So sometimes, the only way you could get 2 checks is to go do a quick back-to-back. I think when UNLV took that game, they knew that it would be a back-to-back, so maybe UNLV doesn't even extend the offer to play if it wasn't a back-to-back. So there's just a lot of different interesting components because in either event, whether UNLV was first in order or St. Mary's was first in order, I think the second one knew they were getting them back-to-back and they were pumped. For Chattanooga, the consequences would have been only getting 1 paycheck instead of 2. So sometimes in scheduling, and we could go around the country and find a few more examples of this, sometimes in scheduling, you just have to do what you have to do for the betterment of the program and then just trust whatever players are available to go or maybe do some load management, right? Where you've got a lot of travel coming up. You can disperse your minutes and have a plan on how to manage. You basically coach with a week-long outlook when it comes to minute distribution, and then you go from there. In Chattanooga's case, too, they have Mulholland, who was not available in their season opener. He's a really important piece at the 5 position that I think they're going to really lean on by the time we get to conference play. So you saw him really get out there and play a little bit more against UNLV, but he's still not 100%. I think competitively, Chattanooga really needed that piece. They certainly got bludgeoned by St. Mary's at the rim. UNLV, had their edges as well. So there's all sorts of factors in all of this. And I think, you look at like Eastern Washington, like that was one where I was extremely impressed because they aren't the deepest team in the world. And I think were picked 7th in the Big Sky. Didn't have a great first year under Dan Monson. They come out this year and they take UCLA pretty deep into the game, in it with a couple minutes to go at Pauley Pavilion. Very impressive. They turn around 2 nights later, go to LMU. They had the lead most of the game and then really let it slip in those last 2 minutes. The foul game made it an 8-point loss, but that game was like a 2-point game with a minute left. And then they had Colorado where they wanted them. And that's even more crazy travel because now you're in altitude, you're in Boulder, just 3 nights after LMU. They lose in overtime. So that's just brutal because, and I put a tweet about that, the Eagles had, really 3 chances to win. I guess in theory they could have gone 3-0, but for them to come out of this week with no wins is really tough to swallow. But I think if Dan Monson can keep these guys' heads up, there's so much to be encouraged by in those 3 performances. So, just a brutal schedule. They got paid for all 3 of those games. There's a lot to build off of there despite the record.
Yep, I was very impressed by Eastern Washington. On my side of things, they were your worst team against the spread last season. A narrow loss against the spread against Loyola Marymount, but looking much better this year, looking much more competitive. And with Dan Monson, he's the guy that's been around the block. Long Beach State, Gonzaga comes to mind. So that has been very encouraging. And it's always encouraging to have Rocco Miller right here on Coast Hoops. And certainly that's been a nice surprise to begin the season. And are there a few other mid-major teams that you've been a little bit taken aback by, whether that be to the positive or the negative with regards to their performance? Because we're doing this right now as Loyola Chicago is getting to take it to them against North Texas. That's been a team that's been on the negative, and we've already talked about a few of the positives with the teams that have knocked off the Mountain West schools.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the big story of the week, I'll be doing a Teams of the Week award every week. So look for that as we start a new week for Basket Under Review, the new site under Trilly Donovan. Excited to do it. And I think it was a really easy decision this week, Greg. So my team of the week will, of course, be the New Orleans Privateers, led by Stacey Hollowell and Master P.
Yes, sir. I've been talking about that. Bringing in Master P might have been one of the best moves by New Orleans in quite some time.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
Who doesn't want to play for Master P?
My goodness, man. Like, the energy down there is amazing. We had both of them on the Field of 68 mid-major show. Oh, it's so cool to have Master P on the show. We could have made that a 2-hour episode and we still had a lot more to talk about. But I think with them bringing over Jacavian Buckley from Southeast Louisiana, an all-Southland player from their backyard, just over in Hammond, over to UNO, that was a big, obviously some money involved there, but that was a big interconference steal from the Lions. I think Buckley projects as their best player long-term, but they got a great game from Colton Benson in the upset at TCU. He was a quality player at Texas State for a couple of years, started his career at Army. And then MJ Thomas was, I believe, either all freshman team or even the freshman of the year for the Southland. So it definitely took some resources to keep MJ Thomas on the team. And now, because they've really beefed up across the board on this roster, MJ Thomas is like their spark off the bench, bringing quality minutes. MJ Thomas had to play. They were so small last year. New Orleans, for those not paying attention last year, went 4-27. And MJ Thomas at 6'8" was basically their 5-man in a lot of their games. This year, he's like their 8th tallest player because Master P and, President of Basketball Operations, Master P, and the way Stacey Hollowell, head coach, and staff attacked the portal was, we got to get a lot bigger. We'll see how it plays out. But with Churchill Abbas starting at 6'10", Enzo Badoma at 6'9", is a big freshman. They've got bodies all over the floor. Panagiotis Pagonis wearing number 99, another 6'9", 220 freshman. They found guys from everywhere. And they have a 7'2" kid, William Patterson, who's getting a little bit of run early on as well. So I think TCU was a little caught off guard. I think the big story of the game in the beginning was 2 things. One, they couldn't get threes to fall. The Horned Frogs finished 3 for 27 from downtown. And I also think, unfortunately for TCU, Malik Diallo, their starting 5-man, tore his ACL during the game, and he will be out for the season. So just a really rough night for the Horned Frogs, but this is more about celebrating the Privateers. And I really look at this roster for the Privateers. I think they're going to be dangerous all year. They get a huge in-state opportunity against LSU on Monday. I can't wait to watch that. In fact, I was looking at flights to maybe go to that game just with all this buzz. So I had to start there. But, Greg, I'll keep going because I want to mention Stephen F. Austin. I thought the way they played against Arkansas State was phenomenal. And I get it, SFA was at home. But, again, this is another Southland Conference team. Maybe America's most improved conference because Keon Thompson was an absolute dog in that game. 26 points, 7 assists, 5 rebounds. And they built a brand new roster under Matt Bruner. Matt Bruner learned under Grant McCaslam, was on Texas Tech's bench last year. And I think we could get a version of SFA this year that rivals the SFA memories of old. Very exciting for the Southland, that development, because Arkansas State is extremely well coached. They won at Ohio on opening night. So very impressed by that. I think with High Point's opening day performance, I think that's been well documented. Nobody expected them to just completely blow the doors off of Furman. They look extremely deadly, maybe the most dangerous one-bid league team out there in the country. I think you look at Yale. Yale started with a tricky opener at preseason unanimous Patriot League favorite Navy. They go in there and destroy Navy by 30 on their floor in the Veterans Classic. How do you show up Navy during the Veterans Classic, Greg? That's just rude, isn't it? Yale's got a no prisoners attitude this year. I really liked what I saw there. One other one to throw out there just for fun, and I don't know where it's going because Rhode Island could be a disaster. I really just like the way Tulsa built their roster. They've had 3 really tough first 3 years of Eric Conkle. They invested this year getting former Rhode Island player David Green. I thought was a great move as a shooter, but I think even better was grabbing the best shooter from St. Thomas is never a bad idea, Miles Barnstable. And, he didn't have a huge opener, but he shared it well, 4 assists, made a couple threes. He's capable of popping off. They've got a lot of depth here at Tulsa, and the American looks pretty wide open, especially with South Florida taking the early loss to George Washington.
Yes, exactly. And our nation's first president, by the way, knocking off South Florida in that neutral court game. They looked pretty rock solid as well. I love all of those suggestions. And is there any game that you're looking forward to coming up for this week that you do have a little bit of a star around? Because we do have a lot of very interesting games. IU Indy has become must-watch TV, by the way, because those games, man. If you want just fun basketball, I can't say that IU Indy is going to hang with its single digits on some of these games, but it's going to be fun. But any of these games that you have a star around that you just want to see maybe a little bit more from these teams?
Well, I was at the home opener, I guess Division I opener for Santa Clara Friday night. A really nice performance, and they thoroughly kind of dominated McNeese. I was impressed with the Broncos. They're much bigger. Some of the pieces they've brought in. And the G League kid, Thierry Darlin, he's 6'8", but he's got a lot of muscle. McNeese has got a bunch of these 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" athletes. But Santa Clara was much more physical, much, just bigger. Completely owned the glass against the Cowboys, 47-28, I believe it was. And Monday night, Santa Clara goes to Xavier, a very rare opportunity to play a Big East team, and especially in their building. And obviously Xavier, with Patino being new and, there's some question marks about how good they are or how good they might not be. They survived their opening night test against Marist by just 4 points. Santa Clara, of course, has to travel cross country. So sometimes you get a little bit of a performance dips in a lot of those types of cases. So I'm just really fascinated to see how they'll do against Xavier. I think if Santa Clara can weather the storm, both with Xavier usually having a great crowd and, of course, going against Big East level talent. It's a real chance here for Santa Clara to start building a resume. That's circled for me. I mentioned New Orleans at LSU. Again, I don't think you can overlook New Orleans. That has so much political meaning because I'm not sure if you saw, but last week it came out that the University of New Orleans, who has been operating under the University of Louisiana system, which is like the Ragin' Cajun Monroe system, is now looking to move back into the LSU school system. And if that gets approved, they'll end up being called LSU New Orleans starting next year, which is their old name. And they'll actually change their colors to purple and gold. So the fact that they're playing on Monday night with New Orleans having all the country's attention, and LSU's actually started off pretty well. They've got 2 blowouts under their belt. We don't know how good they are yet. I think that's must watch for sure. LSU's good enough to win in the laugher, but I think New Orleans is going to play with amazing amount of fight and heart. So we'll see how that plays out. I think as we get into Tuesday night, at the very top of the country, Kentucky's my national championship pick. Louisville looks lights out. That game's happening at Louisville, so I think that's going to get everybody's attention. I probably don't need you to tell you to turn that on. But I do think, Wake Forest and Michigan's also playing in Detroit that night. I don't know what to make of Wake Forest quite yet. I think Michigan is extremely well coached. I'm not sure that they're a top 10 team in my mind, but I just want to keep getting looks at those two teams. So it's interesting they're playing each other. And then Texas Tech and Illinois, that could be an elite battle. We'll see. Illinois got the home court advantage. Could be one where the Illini run away with it. But obviously, if Texas Tech brings it, they've got all sorts of weapons. Seeing those guards, Boswell and Anderson, go against each other, that's just high level stuff on Tuesday. And then I think a little bit lower down the totem pole, you're going to see a game between Murray State and SMU. And I think Murray State is perhaps the most dangerous team from a one-bid league in the country, even more than High Point. And that's because they just loaded up and spent considerable investments in the portal. They had that game on opening day against Omaha, won by about 20. It finished up with an 8-point win, but they had that well in hand with 7 minutes to go. And we'll see what they can do against a big school. SMU also loaded up in the portal. They want to compete for an at-large bid. They project as a bubble team, and I wanted to see what this looks like.
Yep, I do as well. And then I think that St. Thomas getting a nice opportunity on Monday against Washington State. That's certainly one that I'm going to be looking at, as well as it's been a little bit wobbly for Washington State to begin the season as well. We've got a lot of fun games that are going to be coming up this week. And Rocco, you did a great job all off season of being able to look forward to the upcoming season, but it's so nice to be actually able to talk about some of this action with you. I know you're doing a great job at so many different websites, so let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, you can follow me on X/Twitter and Blue Sky, and anything else at Rocco Miller 8 is the handle. My website is bracketeer.org. It's been a great evolution here. All the preseason work is now up, so you can always reference back to that as you're looking for any kind of baseline with your own anticipation of any given matchup. A couple of great writers contributing. Robert LaStella was over in Vegas next to you, Greg, covering the opening day doubleheader. He'll be doing the Charleston Classic for us. He'll be doing all sorts of big events. I think he's doing the Jimmy V in December. Great to have him on board once again after covering the NCAA tournament with us. Over at Basket Under Review, I'm basically doing specialist articles. You can count on the Teams of the Week awards. The first edition will drop on Monday. And yes, we will be talking quite a bit about those New Orleans Privateers. And then, of course, Field of 68, mid-major show is every Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss it. It's live. If you do miss it, we'll give you a mulligan and you can watch it on YouTube later. But yes, that's been awesome. We get a couple great guests. Last week we had Master P and Stacey Hollowell from New Orleans. And we also had Rob Martin, the tremendous point guard, transfer from SEMO, now tearing it up for High Point. He was awesome to have on there as well. We'll continue to do that every week, and that's really exciting. And then last but definitely not least, Greg, I will be getting on a plane late Tuesday and be in the Tampa-St. Pete region because the first ever showdown in St. Pete will begin Thursday morning. Yes, Thursday morning, standalone action from Eckerd College. South Alabama taking on Central Michigan at 11 a.m. Eastern. The only game on. Make sure you turn it on. I'll be on the broadcast as the color analyst, and we got that every morning. So 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, Thursday morning, Friday morning, and Saturday morning on YouTube. Tell your friends at Circa to put it on the big screen.
Oh, they will have it on the big screen. I can assure you of that. And you know that I will have that game on because I am staying for these standalone games out there in Hawaii. I'm always calling for these early games out there in the Carolinas. Not quite the Carolinas, but you know what? Certainly way more than passable. We will always take an early day game out there in the great state of Florida. And Rocco, he does such a great job of being able to analyze this sport. And every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Rocco for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Monday as we hit some main shots. Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Rocco Miller. He does such great work over at bracketeer.org, Field of 68, basket under review. List goes on and on. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So big thanks to Rocco for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Monday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at @GUnit_81, and we are going to be going in Las Vegas station order. This is where we go with the games in the larger conferences first, and then games involving schools from these conferences: the NEC, the America East, the MEAC, the SWAC, the Big South, the Atlantic Sun, the Southland. I believe that I've hit them all. Patriot League as well. Those are going to be the games that are going to be listed at the bottom. So how about if we do get things started with this first game of 7:23-7:24. UConn is playing host to Columbia. Columbia 32 to 32.5 point underdog. Saw this game between 154 to 155.5. This is on the move as they do this. I say UConn as a 33.5 point favorite. I'm a little late up to 33 here. UConn just absolutely took it to UMass Lowell a few days ago, and it's very clear that Coach Hurley is going to show no mercy. It's a big reason why UConn has covered over 75% of their non-conference games over the last 3+ seasons, and with UConn, they brought back so much from a season ago. Solo Ball was a double-figure scorer that shot 40% from 3. Terrace Reed is able to give you 6+ rebounds per game. Alex Caravan at 6'8", shot in the mid-30s from 3, 14 points, 5.5 boards, part of those 2 title teams. So you've got a lot there, and then you bring in Silas Demery and Malachi Smith. Smith, a guy that was throwing out about 5 assists per game at Dayton, and Columbia is just not going to be able to hold up here. Now, Columbia, nice first win of the season against New Haven. I don't put too much into that, as New Haven was a team that was 12-17 at the Division II ranks last season, and I do like Coach Kevin Uvdy, who comes on over after being an assistant at Florida. He maintained much of this roster. Zadine Adibadri is a guy that at 6'10" is able to give you 5+ rebounds per game. You've got some versatility with Blair Thompson. He stands about 6'8". Last year, shot in the low 30s from 3. 2 years ago, shot 40% from 3. He's a consistent 9-point per game guy, a former top 300 recruit, but not having out there Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa means that this team is in a lot of transition in terms of that main guard spot. You have to think that Gerard O'Keefe, who was the guy that really didn't see a lot of minutes last season, he needs to step up in a big way to be able to facilitate offense, and I think that that's going to be a big issue going up against a UConn team that, let's call it what it is, this is still one of the most dominant teams in all of college basketball. Coach Early still knows how to coach, and I don't think that he's going to be showing mercy here to Columbia. I did semi-total here to 155.5. I do think that Columbia is going to look to run a little bit more. The low-scoring game against New Haven, I just attribute to New Haven being not very good on offense, and UConn outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, but perennially a top 20 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Columbia, one of the worst defenses in all of college basketball last year. So in on the over of 155 or less, and I'm willing to lay it here with UConn. 725, 726 on the card. Fairfield's on the road against Seton. Seton's a 12.5 point favorite. Total on this game is 140.5, and circumstance where I did semi-total here out of 136. I'm going to be willing to dive in on the under. Seton last year was outside the top 325 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, with the main crux of their issue not having a lot of three-point shooting, and they did not have a great offensive expose against Wagner over the weekend. And for the Seton squad, I think that they are really going to be struggling on offense this season. They do bring in Adam Clark, who I liked him over at Merrimack. He would give you like 19 points, generate turnovers, give you a few assists per contest, but again, not a three-point shooter. Tawan Simpkins is actually shooting 80% from 3 to start the season. That is not going to be withholding. This man last year over at Elon, 14.5 points, 3 assists, but also shot less than 27% from 3-point range. So have to have their question marks there. Stephon Payne, I think, is going to be able to do a relatively solid job down low. And then they do bring in the 6'6" 2-0 player in Elijah Fisher, who last season when he was over at Pacific, 15.5 points, 5 boards. He's able to throw in there like a steal per contest. But again, a guy that shot less than 30% from 3-point range. I did set Fairfield here as a 12-point dog, so I'm going to be willing to take them. They actually held in their night number 1 against Penn State. Now, I don't think that Penn State is going to be very good, but for Fairfield, the fact that you bring in the Deuce, I think, is going to be able to help this team out quite a bit, as I've got Deuce Turner down for Wadu. I mean, he was a nice sixth man over at UC Santa Barbara last year, a starter over at San Diego, played some solid minutes over at Bucknell, has been a double-figure scorer throughout his career, and And they've done this with him only scoring 5 points in the first 2 games. I have to think that he's able to ascend. Braden Sparks, he's a guy that is one of the main holdovers from a season ago where he was averaging 9.5 points, shot in the low 30s from 3-point range. Fairfield last year had a rough time of it, shooting from 3-point range, and this year they're shooting 25% as a collective. That should be going northward. I do like some of the pieces that they brought in as the freshman in Declan Washafing. Hopefully I said that correct. I know that I did not, but we're just going to call him Declan. He's able to give you 11.5 points per contest. He's been looking pretty rock solid. This team does take a little bit of a half a step back down low. They've been dealing with a few injuries, but Brandon Benjamin, I think he's going to hold his own against a Seton team that they really didn't do the world's greatest job of being able to add depth down low as well. I do think that without Casey and Defu, it's been a case where Shaheen always been exposed as a coach a little bit, and I do think that this is a Fairfield team that's going to be able to hold in this game. Getting north of 12, I'm going to be willing to take the points here, and with regards to this total, I did set mine at a 136, so I'm also going to be in on it under as well. 727, 728 on the card. You got UNC Wilmington, and they are on the road. They're facing off against Kent State. Kent State is currently a 1.5 to a 2.5 point favorite. This total is hiked all the way up to 164.5, and I think that this has went too far. I set my total at a 146.5. I'm in on the under. Now, I do think that Kent State is going to be a little bit better with their 3-point shooting this season, but they were still 311th in the country in terms of 3-point shooting percentage last year. UNC Wilmington coming off of being a top 70 team in opponents' 2-point shooting percentage on the road last year, and Wilmington, they were an efficient offense last year. They were a top 50 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but this is not a team that's going to be looking to run it and gun it by any stretch of the imagination. For Wilmington, they were about 253rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game last year, so I do think that they are hiking up this total just a little bit too far. I set my total more around a 146, so I'm going to be in on the under. Now with Wilmington, I do think that they're going to be able to flow good, clean offense. Nolan Hodge is a guy that comes back after he was a little bit of a do-it-all guy a season ago, and I love the Adam Madison Dewar. He was within the conference over at Monmouth last year, shot about 38% per 3, 12.5 points, 3 assists per contest. He does a nice job in terms of being able to lead this team, but you've got a little bit of transition with regards to backcourt for this UNC Wilmington team as well. I do want to see who that main facilitator is going to be, whether that's going to be Madison Dewar. Maybe you trust in a little bit more of someone like a Mikkel Smith, who was a little bit more of an ancillary guy last year, and this team is going to be very much looking down low to Patrick Wessler, along with Christian May. May comes over from Towson, where he was a rock-solid rebounder, and Wessler, he's a former top 250 recruit that is a true 7-footer coming in from Virginia Tech. I think that they're going to do a nice job down low, but they do face off against a Kent State team that year in and year out, they're a top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per-possession basis, and I do think that Kent State is going to be able to do a nice job down low with having Rocco Gillespie supplying 26 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. Like the final 12 games of the season, he was averaging 10-plus rebounds per game. He had a really nice end to last season, and Morgan Stafford looks like he is going to be very much a prolific scorer this year. How about 55 points in the first 2 games of the season? Don't think that that's going to be quite withholding, but I mean, for Kent State, they should be able to flow good, clean offense. Zion Medley has never been too much of a scorer, but is always a guy that gives you 3 assists, generates a steal per contest. He's a really good just pass first guy in general. And then I do think that Rayvon Griffith has a little bit of upside, a former top 100 recruit that began his career over at Cincinnati, didn't see a lot of run there. He's been coming off the bench a little bit more of the 6th man this season as 6'7", a little bit of a combo player. I do think that for Kent State, they are going to be able to do a nice job generating those turnovers, and I do think that UNC Wilmington is going to be looking to slow this game down. You have a Kent State team that traditionally is right around like 100th in terms of total possessions per game. They're fast, but they're not playing at warp speed, so I told more around a 146.5. I like the under. Kent State made them a 2.5 point favorite. One to lay up to a deuce here with Kent State. 729, 730 on the card. Pittsburgh is playing us to Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan, 17.5 to 18.5 point dogs. So this game is between 146 to 146.5. Did somebody to a 150.5. I do like the over for Pittsburgh. I recognize that they are in a little bit of transition with their backcourt. You lose Jalen Lowe from last season. That's going to be hurting you a little bit. And gone are the days of having the Diaz-Graham brothers, who had quite a bit of versatility. 2 years ago, you had Frederico, so nice they named him twice. So that means that you look to Cam Corrin down low. He's been solid. He's had 25 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife team with bringing in a guy, DeMarco Minor, last season over at Oregon State. He just did a bit of everything. 10 points, 5 assists, steal and a half per contest, career about 30% 3-point shooter, so a little bit lackluster there, but you have a lot of guys that are able to do a nice job crashing glass. Papa Amandu Kante, he's got 18 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season after he was a little bit more of a reserve last year. Brandon Cummins, he was a nice ancillary guy last season. It looks like he's going to take a stride forward, career 40% 3-point shooter, and For Eastern Michigan, this team was just absolutely grody with their defense last year. They were outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, one of the worst three-point shooting defenses in all of college basketball. So while Pittsburgh might not be this just flamethrower from three-point range or anything like that, they're clearly going to be able to get some good, clean, open looks. And with this Eastern Michigan unit, you do have a guy in Mac Manseal, who last season was averaging double figures over at Detroit. Lone problem for him was that he just could not stay out there on the court. He was dealing with quite a few injuries, and you do have a little bit of a changing of the guard. You had last year Jalen Terry along to Sean Nelson, two guys that played with one another over at DePaul a few seasons ago, doing a nice job being able to lead the way. Now they lose both of those guys, so this is very much a team that is in transition right now. I've never really been the biggest stan of Stan Heath. That was not a pun that I was intending on, but there it is. But they're going to be looking to, hopefully I get this one correct, Mohamed Habab, who comes on over after he was at Central Michigan to begin his career, just could not get out there on the floor last season. A guy that has relatively good stretchability at 6'9", but he's a guy that has a lot of question marks with him. They did bring in some compound transfers, Edison Patterson along John Sanders. These were two guys that were very solid out there in the Southland. Patterson is a former top 100 recruit, began his career over at Oregon and Nevada, where last year 13.6 boards, not necessarily going to light you up from three. And John Sanders, he was someone that was shooting in the high 30s from three-point range, so to have the upside that he's able to bring to the table for this team. That said, I do think that for Pittsburgh, they're going to do a really good job of just being able to take it to this team down low with Corn and company, and I do think that for Pittsburgh, they do find a way to get the job done against an Eastern Michigan team that loses so much production from a season ago. I set my number at an 18.5, willing to lay up to 18 with Pittsburgh, and like the over, semi-total 150.5, 731, 732 on the card. It is SIU Edwardsville, and they are going to be playing those to Indiana State. Indiana State is a underdog of 2.5 points on a game. It is 156.5. I said Indiana State is a 2-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on them outright on the money line. With regards to Indiana State, this is a team that's in quite a bit of transition as well. I mean, it really stems back from 2 years ago when you lose Josh Schertz, Robbie Avila, all those guys. That's just very hard to be able to rebuild from. And the big thing for Matthew Graves' team last year is that they were just unable to take care of the ball outside the top 300 in terms of ball security, and that's been rearing its ugly head this season. 26 turnovers in the first 2 games of the season, but I like the way that they revamped this backcourt, bringing in a guy in Sterling Young, who last season was very rock solid over at Florida A&M, the SWAC player of the year off the bench with 17 points per contest, shooting about 35% from three-point. So absolutely love what he's going to be able to bring to this backcourt. Additionally, you do have some size with 6'9", 6'10" Marcus Harding. He's been able to supply the team with 20 points in the first 2 games of the season. Doesn't necessarily pop it well from 3, but he's able to pop it from 3. Campbell Wagner is a guy that's back from the season ago as well. So we've got a little bit more camaraderie in the backcourt. And for SIU Edwardsville, they're coming off of a nice triumph over the weekend, so you do like to be able to see that. But with this Edwardsville team, you've got a lot of guys that are just very much new from a season ago. They do get back Ring Malaith, who he was a solid player down low for them. He was able to supply 5+ rebounds per contest, and this was a Edwardsville team that a season ago, they were one of the more under-the-radar defensive teams in all of college basketball. They were a top 50 team in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, so I do think that that'll be able to give them some rough and tumble moving forward. Seems like they're going to look to play a little bit more up-tempo this year, and for Indiana State, certainly a team that they are looking to push the pace as well. Top 40 team in terms of total possessions per game, but for Edwardsville, even though they did have that nice win against UTSA, meet me for the Roadrunners, you still do have a little bit of question mark in terms of how this backcourt is going to be running in that game, along with their non-Division 1 game. They've had 29 turnovers here in the first 2 games of the season, and that main ball handler spot is a bit of a question mark. CJ Hall, Jordan Pickett, these are the 2 guys that they're likely going to be looking to a little bit more. They are getting back Miles Thompson as well. He was missing for their non-Division 1 game, 13.7 rebounds in that first game against a Division 1 opponent, and last year was able to shoot 44% from 3, 5.5 points, 4 boards, as a little bit more of an ancillary guy at 6'7". So this is going to be a team that's going to be pretty strong down low, but I do think that backcourt play of Indiana State is going to be just enough for them to be able to get the job done, and I do think that Indiana State going to be able to press the pedal to the metal here, but again, SIU Edwardsville, relatively strong defensive team, so I'm going to be willing to go under here. Did semi-total at a 156, and with Edwardsville, I set them as the underdog, so I'm liking Indiana State on the money line. 733, 734 on the betting board. From the Sanford Pentagon, you've got Mississippi State and Iowa State doing battle. Iowa State 4.5 to 5.5 point favorites. 151.5 to 152 is the total, and made Iowa State the 7.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number for Iowa State. This is pretty much the stomping grounds of TJ Alzenberger. Prior to going to Iowa State, he was over at South Dakota State, and he has done a great job of instilling defense into this program. Each of the last 4 years, Iowa State has been in the top 16 in terms of both points allowed on a per possession basis and also in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. And I think that that's going to be hurting a Mississippi State team that under Chris Jans, they just have never been a good three-point shooting team in all 3 years that he's been there. They have been outside the top 270 in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Now, they've got a really good go-to scorer in Josh Hubbard, who's been able to supply the team over the last 2 seasons with over 17 points per contest. Had 17 points in that opening win against North Alabama, but keep in mind, Mississippi State was down like 8 points with about 15 minutes remaining against North Alabama. They really got tested there, and they do have a nice big man in Quincy Ballard who comes in from Wichita State last year, 7+ boards. He was able to give the team multiple blocks per contest, but other than you really don't have a lot of big men. And when Mississippi State has really been firing all cylinders, they've had these guys down low, like even a guy like a Keyshawn Murphy from a season ago, obviously Tolu Smith 2 years ago. These are guys that really give Mississippi State that identity, and not having that, having to go up against a guy in Joshua Jefferson who last year for Iowa State, 14 points, 7 boards, multiple steals per contest, just really fits this system. And for Iowa State, I don't think that they're going to be as prolific on offense as they were a season ago. Last year, they were really uplifted by the fact that they had Curtis Jones and Keyshawn Gilbert in the fold, and now the head of the stake is really Tamon Lipsby, and Lipsby, he's a little bit more of a defense-oriented guy, and a guy that does a really good job of being able to dole it out. He'll give you 4+ assists per contest, he'll generate multiple steals per game, and then you bring in a guy like Dominic Nelson, who is a nice defensive player over at Utah Valley, was a 15+ point per game scorer, but not a guy that's necessarily going to go into flamethrower mode from 3-point range. Your top 3-point shooter for this team most likely going to be 6'8" Milan Mimosilovic, who's been about a 39% 3-point shooter since the start of last season, and I do think that with Iowa State, they do a nice job generating some turnovers, getting this game a little bit lower scoring, semi-total 145.5. I like the under, and I'm going to be 108 here with Iowa State. 735, 736 on the card. Lindenwood is on the road against St. Louis. St. Louis 23.5 to 24.5 point favorites. 163.5 to 164.5 is the total, and with St. Louis, I did set them as a favorite of 22.5 points. So, going to be willing to take 23+ here with Lindenwood. Lindenwood was a team that did a good job of generating turnovers last year. Top 65 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and they return much of that identity from a season ago. Now, with bringing back much of that core from a season ago, that also means that they bring back a lot of guys that can't shoot it from 3. Last year, they were dead stinking last in college basketball out of 364 teams with their 3-point shooting percentage, so that's something that's a little bit rough for this program. They were shooting 26.7% from 3-point range, so they're going to need to do a little bit of a better job on that front, but with Lindenwood, you do have to like the fact that you bring in a guy, Makai Cooper, who I think can really elevate this backcourt. Last season, he was over at Miami of Ohio, supplying that team with about 6 points, 2.5 assists, steal per contest, and he did shoot 39% from 3-point range, so you're going to get a little bit more of a spark there. Jadis Jones, he last season as a freshman put up great numbers with about 12.5 points, 5.5 boards. He's only 6'5", so doesn't necessarily have ideal size, but he does a nice job just being able to stretch the floor, and then they bring in Robert Lewis from Arkansas Pine Bluff, where at Pine Bluff last year, he was limited to only 6 games, but in that small sample size, he did show the ability to be able to stretch the floor, 7.5 points, 6.5 boards, is able to give you a steal and a block per contest, so lots of good versatility there, and we have seen St. Louis score a combined 200 points in the first 2 games of the season. I do think that things are going to be slowing down a little bit here for St. Louis, but Robbie Avila, he looks much more efficient than a season ago, where he went from having 1.8 turnovers per game 2 years ago at Indiana State. Last year at St. Louis, that was up to 3.3 turnovers per game. It does feel like the backcourt with the likes of Quentin Jones, Amari McCautry, and company are doing a nice job of being able to take the load off of him, so that's big. And Deion Brown, I think, is very under the radar guy. Keep in mind, 2 seasons ago when he was over at UMBC, he was averaging 19 points per contest. Last year at Boston College, was still seeing starts for that team. Took a little bit more of a back seat, but was giving that team 7.5 points per contest, so I like the way that he's able to elevate, and we know that Josh Schertz's system is very good on the offensive side of things, but this is not a team that necessarily gets a lot of second and third chances on the glass. For St. Louis, they still have had 30 turnovers in the first 2 games of the season, and I think those turnovers keep Lindenwood lively. So set my line at 22.5. We'll take 23+ here with Lindenwood, and like the under, set my total 156.5. 737, 738 on the card. UW Milwaukee plays us at Little Rock. Little Rock finds themselves as a 1.5 point underdog, and their total game between 158.5 to 159, and I made a total of 146. I'm going to be in on the under for UW Milwaukee. They gave up 86 points of Wofford a few days ago. That's not necessarily great, but keep in mind, this is a Little Rock team that last season they were outside the top 280 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They were very much banking on KK Robinson to be able to elevate this offense. KK Robinson goes out with an injury once again before the start of the season. Second straight year that they lose him. You just feel bad for the guy, but that means that Little Rock is probably going to need to play much more similarly to what they did last season. Last year, Little Rock was one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game. They were well outside the top 275. Now, this is a UW Milwaukee team that's going to be looking to push tempo a little bit, but they're not necessarily a warp speed team because they're a team that they very much pride themselves in terms of being able to grab rebounds. Last year, they were number 4 in all of college basketball in terms of their rebound percentage, and even though they do lose JaMychal Stillwell from seasons ago, they still have in their first 2 games of the season, so small sample size, 4 guys have grabbed at least 5.5 rebounds per game. Last year, Milwaukee was about 118th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they do face off against a Little Rock team that was a top 50 team in terms of their total points allowed on a per possession basis, and Little Rock more around about 194th in the country in terms of total possessions per game last season. But for this Little Rock team, even though they do lose some of the heart and soul pieces from seasons ago, they still do have a game breaker that is going to be able to help them out. So even though you don't have KK Robinson out there on the floor, you bring back Jonathan Lawson, who is a 15-plus point per game guy, and they're going to have a nice low post presence of their own. Tungthe Gakic, I've always had a tough time saying that name. Gentleman that began his career over at Florida, a guy that's able to give you a block and a half per contest at 6'9", has a little bit of something to be desired on the offensive side of things, but has always been a rock-solid defender, and then bringing in Braxton Bayless should be able to elevate the team a little bit as well. He was a starter at Western Kentucky last year that generated for the team about 8 points, 3 boards. He did shoot 43% from 3, though. It was on a very small sample size. As for his career, though, been about a 39% three-point shooter, but I do think that UW Milwaukee should be a nice size favorite with Little Rock without having Robinson out there. They have a little bit more depth than a season ago, but depth is going to be a bit of an issue for them, and facing on field, he's saying 6'10". He's been in the program for quite a bit. I think that he's doing for a relatively nice year after last year. He took a little bit more of a backseat to Mr. JaMychal Stillwell 2 seasons ago. 9.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game last year, more like 7 points and 5 rebounds per game. But you also bring in Seth Hubbard, who I think is going to do a nice job in terms of just giving the team some scoring. 2 years ago, over at Western Michigan, was generating for that team 14 points per contest. Last year, in a 6th-man role over at Toledo, more like 8.5 points per contest. And then we've got Amar Uyagard, who is a good scorer in the small sample size that he had last season at Fresno State. He was averaging 13.5 points per contest. He was doing a nice job playing off the ball at about 6'4", and then he just decided to abruptly leave the program. So you've got a lot of intrigue with this UW Milwaukee team. Danilo Janovic, who began his career at SMU, he's rock solid down low, and I do think that this UW Milwaukee team wins from within and a little bit of a slog. Semi-total 146, like the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay with Milwaukee. 739, 740 on the card. It is Santa Clara, and they're going to be on the road against Xavier. The X-Men are a pretty slim favorite here. You're going to be finding them between 2.5 and 3-point favorites. 155.5 to 156.5 is the total, and I did set Xavier as a 4-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the small number. I recognize that for Xavier, their first few results have been less than savory. They were pushed to the brink against Marist, and then against Lemoyne, it was a little bit rough for them, but the defense looks good. They're under the tutelage of Richard Pitino, whose New Mexico team last year was 11th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, so he knows how to be able to instill that in. Malik Moore has been able to give you more. He's come in, and he's been averaging 16.5 points per contest in these first 2 games. Last year was a rock-solid player over at Montana, and he's clearly taken some strides forward after last year at Montana. 12.5 points, was a 40% three-point shooter, and this team has good size. You've got a pair of guys at 6'10", and Anthony Robinson and Jovan Mimasilovic, who have been pretty solid, and then Phil Brochovin. He comes on over with Pitino from New Mexico. He's had 13 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season, so New Mexico's guys that have come over with Pitino have been able to help with that regard, and for Pitino's teams, they've only allowed 11 offensive rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. The problem is they themselves have just had a tough time in terms of being able to find good shots, down low. They've been outside the top 300 with regards to their field goal shooting percentage, and that's the reason why I do like the under. I set my total 154. Now, Santa Clara, traditionally a top 100 team in terms of total possessions per game, and once again last year in the top 60 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but they do lose quite a few of those guys that were just so rock solid in that offense from a season ago. When you lose guys like Adama Ball, Carlos Stewart, that's a little bit rough, though. Elijah Mai last year, 11 points, 2.5 assists per game. He's really getting the keys to the car, and Jake Emsinger, he looks a little bit improved on offense. After last year, he was actually grabbing more rebounds than points. I'm not even kidding. He nearly doubled up his amount of points with regards to the amount of rebounds that he was able to get, but a big key here is going to be Brenton Napper. Napper has been in the program for quite a while. He's always been like a 6-point per game guy. 2 years ago as a starter, last year with a sixth man that shot about 42% from three. Has had just 12 points in the first 2 games of the season. Has gone like 2 of 13 from three. I do expect him to be able to get things moving forward, but this is a little bit of a banged up team. Chris Tejo, who comes over from Iowa, he has yet to see the floor. He's a former top 100 recruit. Brandon Yasaro has just not been able to get out there as well. He's another guy that they were probably going to be banking on a little bit for a bit of production, but you do have out there a guy that I like in Alexander, boy, I'm going to have a tough time with this last name, Gavlyugov. He comes on over from the country of Bulgaria. He has looked very rock solid after he began his career over at Villanova and couldn't get out there on the floor. Last season, he's come off the bench for 27 points in the first 2 games, has shot it really well from 3-point range, so he's a guy that's going to be able to give you a little bit of spark, but I do think that in the end, the Xavier just defense-oriented style, even though they bring in a lot of guys that, and let's call it what it is, they were mid-major guys a season ago, so they're taking a big leap forward. I do think that they're going to be able to do just enough to be able to get the job done in this case. I did set my total at 154, so I like the under, and with Xavier willing to lay up to 3.5 with them. 741, 742 on the card. You've got Cleveland State, and they're going to be on the road against Northwestern. Northwestern is a sizable favorite here of 20 to 20.5 points. 147 to 147.5 is the total, and with Cleveland State, I'm going to be willing to take those points. I set them as an underdog of 14.5 points. Now, Cleveland State being able to hold within a possession against Loyola Chicago is starting to look a little bit less impressive because it has been a rough season thus far for Loyola Chicago. That said, they did a nice job coming out night number 1 and being able to put out there a good display, and I do think that for Cleveland State, even though they are now under the tutelage of Rob Summers, who was an assistant for Dennis Gates over at Missouri a season ago, that this is still going to be a rock-solid team. You bring in a guy in Josiah Harris, who he was over at Akron and West Virginia the last few seasons, and I mean, he was a rock-solid player when he was over at West Virginia as a part-time starter 2 seasons ago. Last year was only able to play 6 games over at Akron, but guy that's able to elevate, and he's able to shoot in the mid-30s from 3-point range at 6'7", really good versatility. I like his game, and then I think that Kamari Jones is really going to have a big role in the backcourt. Another guy that just dealt with injuries throughout his career, was supposed to be a nice player over at Western Carolina last year, just was unable to get out there on the floor, was a highly touted junior college transfer a few seasons ago, and you've got a guy in Foster Wonders who's able to pop it from 3, comes in from UW Green Bay, so I really actually like this roster. And for Northwestern, it's a very top-heavy team, because you've got Nick Martinelli, who last year gave you 20 points per contest, and I think that he's one of the most underrated players in all of college basketball. I think that he's going to be in for another really nice season, but what are you going to be able to pair around him? Thus far, it's been KJ Wyndham, who's been able to give you a little bit at the guard spot, who's been able to supply 14 points in those first 2 games, and our Tinton Page, who he was a former top 100 recruit, spent some time over at Cincinnati. He has come in and he's made an impact right away. He's been able to supply the team with 25 points, a combined 19 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. That's big because Northwestern, year in and year out, has always been a team that's been a little bit rough on the glass, so being able to add a 6'11" body like him is big, but you really don't have anyone outside of him that's really able to man things down low. Max Green, the transfer from Holy Cross, was a rock-solid 3-point shooter, has yet to get going, and for Northwestern, they've just been winning these games, and they've won convincingly in both of their first 2 games, but it's been via defense, as they have allowed 47 and 52 points respectively. Now, was against Mercyhurst and Boston U, but I do think that that's going to cause this game to be a little bit slower. Rob Summers is clearly looking to play Cleveland State much more fast, being a Dennis Gates' disciple and being an assistant over at Missouri. He's going to be looking to push a little bit more tempo, but I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a slower slog, but that said, I do think that this Cleveland State team going to find a way to hold in there. Set my line at 14.5, so like the points here with Cleveland State, and I'm going to be taking a shot on the under. 743, 744 on the card. Grand Canyon plays us in Northern Illinois. Grand Canyon is laying between 18 to 18.5 points, and 164 to 164.5 is the total. I did set my total at a 161. I'm going to be in on the under for Northern Illinois. They were dead last in the country last year in terms of offensive rebound percentage. They only rebounded like 14 to 14.5% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound, so they just don't have a lot of size, and this Grand Canyon team, who did look a little bit rough against Youngstown State, losing on their home floor over the weekend, I do think that this is going to be a rock-solid bounce-back spot for them. Now, we saw Northern Illinois give a little bit more of a spirited effort in the second half in their loss against Wisconsin, but still, this is a Northern Illinois team that they've got a lot of work to do. They have lost a lot of their top scorers over the last few years in the transfer portal, though they do bring in Jayo Tika. I remember many years ago, this is like 4 years ago, when he was over at Marist, he was averaging 13 points per contest as a freshman. He was shooting 40% from 3, so you have some upside there. And then they bring in G&I Cobb as well. Cobb last season was over at Columbia, was a little bit more of an ancillary piece for them, but was generating a steal. He's able to flow some good, clean offense. Not a guy that he himself is going to be too much of a difference maker in terms of scoring, but he's able to get the ball to someone like a J.J. Taylor, who I think that he's got a bit of upside after he began his career over at Memphis and Central Florida. Actually averaged about 4.5 to 5 points per contest over at Central Florida a season ago, but this is not a team that's necessarily going to shoot the lights out from three-point range, and they certainly have a void down low, and I think that's where this Grand Canyon team is really going to be taking hold, and that's a big reason why I did set Grand Canyon here as a 21-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay that number. For Grand Canyon, I think that they're going to be a little bit angry after what happened over the weekend. And additionally, for Grand Canyon, you got Nana Owusu-Onane, who 2 seasons ago over at Brown, he was a do-it-all sort of guy with 15-plus points, 7-plus boards. He did a little bit of everything, and it looks like he's going to be that for Grand Canyon this year. He, in the first 2 games, has had 36 points, 21 rebounds, 8 assists. He's been generating 3 steals per contest. The big key for this team is being able to get a little bit more out of Willem Breitenbach, who he comes over from Washington, has not been able to give you a lot of scoring thus far, and I do think that the big key for this team as well is finding who that main facilitator is going to be, because you've got a few different options for this team. Brian Moore Jr. comes out over for Norfolk State. Makai Williams, who was very rock solid last season when he was over at UT Arlington, and has been a guy that has been in the system over the last few years in general, and when he was over at UT Arlington was a 45% three-point shooter. Here in his career over at Grand Canyon, we've really seen a bit of sinkage with that three-point shooting, but that said, I do think that this bunch going up against a Northern Illinois team that was outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're going to be able to take it to them, but the inability for Northern Illinois to be able to get those second and third chances, I think does just enough to be able to keep this total under, so I might tell it 161. I like the under, and I am going to be willing to lay up to 20.5 here with Grand Canyon. 745, 746 on the card. Washington State plays us at St. Thomas. The Tommies are 2.5 point underdog. 159.5 to 161 is the total, and this is my total 158.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under. Washington State under David Riley is looking to play very up-tempo. They were a top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game last season, and last year St. Thomas, they went from being a slower team to really cranking up their tempo. They were a top 15 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. I do sense St. Thomas playing a little bit more slowly. Now, part of that could be because they played their first game of the season against St. Mary's, and St. Mary's is always a very nice dominant team in terms of being able to lock you up, making things a little bit more slow and control, but that's it for St. Thomas. They do lose a few of their top scorers from a season ago, like a Miles Barnstable. That's a little bit rough, but Nolan Mansell has been able to give the team 44 points in the first 2 games of the season, and then you've got the likes of Ryan Defoe, Parker Bajurke. These guys have been in the system for a little bit. I like what they bring to the table. Ben Oosterman has been with the team for quite a while, and they brought in Austin Hero. Yes, that is the brother of Tyler Hero. Couldn't get out there on the floor over at South Carolina last season, but guy from the great state of Wisconsin that I think is going to be able to be a good fit in. We know that family roots, they have a good ability to be able to knock down shots, though I do like Washington State in this spot. I did set them as a 6.5 point favorite. It's a really nice home court advantage that Washington State has. Now, they haven't necessarily used it to their advantage, losing at home to Idaho to begin the season. Not necessarily great, but I do think that this is going to be a team that's going to be a little bit better down low, and that's always the problem that you have for St. Thomas. St. Thomas, since they've gone up to the D1 ranks, they don't have a lot of size, so they're always outside the top 250 in terms of rebound percentage. You've got Emmanuel Ugbo, who in the first 2 games of the season has had 13 rebounds, comes over after he was a part-time starter over at Boise State last season. KD Okafor, or ND Okafor, he comes over after he was over at Cal to begin his career. Last year, he was a nice ancillary role player for Washington State with like 5.5 points, 3 boards per contest, and I fully expect him to be able to take some strides forward. Now, the big key is getting just things online with regards to backcourt. They have yet to be able to find that main facilitator, though I do think that Jerome Morton is going to be able to do some nice things. He comes on over from Morehead State, where last season he was giving the team 3.5 assists, 10.5 points per contest, high 30s three-point shooter. I think that he and Thomas Thratson, who's one of the main guys that is left over from a season ago, they're going to be able to play well in tandem with one another, and getting back Richard Varvers, who has just dealt with injury all throughout his career. Last year was limited to just 16 games. He came over from Quinnipiac a few seasons ago. I think that he's going to be able to give you a little bit of spark as well. He last year shot 48% from three-point range, and it's very, very small sample size. Do you think that in the end, Washington State finds a way to be able to get the job done? You've got 2 dueling styles. St. Thomas really doesn't generate a lot of turnovers. Washington State, they had a tough time taking care of the ball, but this is a defense I think is going to be able to generate a little bit of pressure as well. So I did set my total here at a 158.5. I do think that the likes might be lost with the St. Thomas team with all the travel and trying to get out there to Pullman. So like the under, and I'm I'm going to be willing to lay it here with Washington State. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we hit the extra games. 747, 748. Cal State Fullerton is going to be on the road against Cal. Cal is a favorite of 22.5 points. 153.5 is the total. I made my line 20.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Fullerton. Now, Fullerton was one of the most sorry teams in all of college basketball last season. Like, they were outside the top 320 in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis, and it's because they had no frickin' point guard whatsoever. Like, if you have no point guard, you have no hope in college basketball. They finally have a little bit more facilitation. They bring in a guy in Bailey Nunn, who he was over at Sacramento State last year. Last year, he was giving that team 3.5 assists, 6.5 points per contest. Not an amazing three-point shooter. He's a career about 30.5% three-point shooter, but you don't need him to pop it from three. You just need him to get the ball to other guys that pop it from three. So that's been nice for them. And they bring in Jefferson De La Cruz Monegro, who he's began his career over at Western Michigan. I believe they spend a little bit of time at Valparaiso. He's able to give you some nice upside as well. Bryce Cofield has come over as a non-D1 guy, and he put in there 17 points in the first two games, so he's been able to do a nice job as well, and his team is going to be a little bit outgunned with regards to size. You've really only got one guy above 6'8" that's seeing meaningful minutes, and Kendrick De Luna. De Luna is a guy that last season he was a little bit of an ancillary guy. He was able to give the team about 5.5 points, so he should be able to lock it down. Needs to work on the rebounding a little bit, and for Cal, I'm actually very bullish on this team. I think that year number 3 under this Madsen system is going to be very good for them. You bring in a guy that I like in Day-Day Ames, who in the first 2 games of the season, he's put in there 41 points. John Camden last season over at Delaware was shooting 40+% from 3 as a 6'6" combo player. Chris Bell, keep in mind, 2 years ago when he was at Syracuse, he was averaging 12 points on 42% three-point shooting, had a little bit of an off year last year. Looks like he's firing all cylinders as well, and then you've got a guy down low that should be able to win the battle in Lee Dort, but I do think that with this Fullerton team, now that they finally have some facilitation, I do think that they're able to hold in this game. I do think that this is going to be a little bit more of an up-tempo game because the Madsen style is very good, tenacious defense, but is also pushing tempo at the same time with Fullerton. I do think that there's going to be some sloppiness still with regards to that backcourt. There's still a bit of transition, and Fullerton has never really been an up-tempo team, so I set a total of 152.5 here at the 153.5, like the under and the points here of Fullerton. Now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
3 of 6, 625, 3 of 6, 626. You've got UMass Lowell playing host to New Haven. New Haven is a 10.5 point underdog. Total on this game is 146. Setting New Haven as a 13.5 point underdog. I'm going to be willing to lay with UMass Lowell. I just don't think that New Haven does their part with this total. With New Haven, they have yet to break the 60-point plateau in any of their 3 games, and they just got completely dump trucked over the weekend. They had to play a back-to-back spot. They lose to Columbia by kind of 71-53, and then in that game against Penn State, they lost that game where they got doubled up. I think it was 87-43. You just don't have D1 talent on this roster. Like, they lost 4 of their top 5 scorers from a team that was 12-17 the Division I level. They didn't bring in a single guy with Division I experience. So now you're looking at Najim George and Andre Pasha, who they combined for 28 points per contest here in the first 3 games of the season. Yay, verily there, but I mean, these are guys that just don't belong at the Division I level. They're trying to play at the Division I level. They've got absolutely no size whatsoever up and down the boulevard on that roster. Now, you've got a UMass Lowell team that, if you looked at what they did on Friday, they got down 44-3 in their game against UConn. They lost that game by 60, and yet I still set them as a 17.5 point favorite because at the very least, you've got a little bit of, shall we say, heart with regards to this team. You've got a guy in J.J. Massaquoi who I think that he's going to be a nice freshman for them. I know that there were a lot of people buzzing about him. He's had 23 points in the first 2 games of the season. They bring in a guy in Jared Frey who began his career over at Stony Brook. At Stony Brook last year, was averaging about 8.5 points per contest, was a bit more of a 6th man that's been a mid-30s 3-point shooter, and I do think that Austin Green is going to do a nice job coming in from Texas State, where he last season was a nice little bit of a role player for them. He's able to give you a bit down low with about 4.3 rebounds per game at 6'8". He should be able to win that battle against a New Haven team that just flat out doesn't have a lot of size. And this is a UMass Lowell team that they are very, very much down from a season ago. But that said, I'm still willing to trust in them against a team that should still be at the Division II level. I set my total 139.5. Flat out don't think that New Haven does their part with this total. I'm in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay with UMass Lowell. 3 of 6, 627, 3 of 6, 628. Rutgers plays host to Maine. Maine hopes to not get Maine as they're underdogs of 18.5 points. 136.5 is the total, and instead of a total of a 137.5, I am going to be in on the over. Now with Maine, they actually bring in the other of the Flag brothers, Ace Flag, as the Flags are actually based out there in the great state of Maine, so that's the way that they were able to land them, so that's a very good ad for Maine. But that said, other than that, you don't have necessarily a ton to be looking at in terms of excitement for this team. They do bring in Brian Mabry. He was at the, I believe, MAC level last season. He was playing for Miami of Ohio along with Quinnipiac. Last year over at Quinnipiac, couldn't get out there on the floor, but when he was at Miami of Ohio for his 2 years, was a mid-30s three-point shooter, 7.5 points per contest, really a one-trick pony sort of guy, but he does give this team a little bit of scoring. And then DJ Beal was a rock-solid player at 6'9" over at Southeast Missouri State, so you've got a little bit of something there, but that said, I do think that this is going to be a rough go of it against a Rutgers team that's getting back to their roots, playing slow, good defense. As for Rutgers, they have been outside the top 125 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis each out of the last 19 seasons, but I do think that they're going to be looking to play that tempo more that they had 2 years ago, where they were hovering right around about 200th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I don't think that they go back to being super-duper slow. They are not going to be playing as up-tempo as they did last season with their 2 NBA draft picks. You're bringing a guy in Darren Buchanan, who I really liked over at George Washington, and when he was playing for our nation's first president last season, 10.5 points, 5.5 boards, not necessarily a great three-point shooter, but he should be able to do a nice job locking it down on defense, and it looks like they're going to be featuring a lot of Tariq Francis. In the first game of the season, he came out there, he had 20 points, and when he was over at NJIT last season, he was flying that team with 19 points per contest. You've also got a guy in Jamichael Davis, who I think is a little bit of upside. He and Dylan Grant are the 2 main holdovers from a season ago, and those 2 guys looked very good in their first game against Rider, albeit Rider is not necessarily a great team, but is Maine really that great of a team either? Maine has always been based around generating turnovers and losing those guys that have been so rock solid on that defense from the last few seasons, as last year they had Kellen AJ Lopez, guys like that, Jaden Clayton. Now that they are out of the fold, they have to completely turn over that backcourt, and I think that's going to be a big issue for them against a pretty fierce Rutgers defense, especially at the rack. Set by total 137.5 here at the 136.5. I like the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 21 here with Rutgers. 3 at 6-6-29, 3 at 6-6-30. You've got Niagara, and they're going to be playing us to Delaware St. Delaware St is a underdog of 5.5 points. 137 is the total, and set by line at 9.5. I'm going to be one to lay. Now, Delaware State, they should fare a little bit better than they did a few nights ago, where they just got completely dump trucked by Syracuse, but Niagara did show a little bit of promise a few nights ago. I recognize it was a loss that they took at the hands of Binghamton, but that said, I do think that this is a team that has a little bit of upside in the backcourt with having Justin Page back in the fold. Page is pretty much the main guy that is back from a year ago, where he was averaging about 5.5 points per contest, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. They're going to be relying upon a lot of junior college guys. They're going to be relying upon a lot of D1 guys to be able to come in and hold down the fort. You've got Trenton Walters, who comes on over from Radford after he was a guy that 2 years ago couldn't get out there on the floor for them. He went to the non-D1 ranks, had himself a nice year last year, and then Reggie Perta-Home, he was a guy that at the non-D1 level as well was a pretty rock-solid guy. It's a Niagara team that year in and year out, they typically do struggle with regards to having a lot of size down low. You're probably looking at Justin Hawkins, who's stands 6'7", to be able to lend a little bit of versatility, but for Delaware State, they had a really nice rotation of guys last season that were able to do a rock-solid job on defense, and they lose pretty much all of that under the tutelage of Stan Waterman, so I mean, it's going to be really tough to be able to replace the likes of a Kasim Watson. Martez Robinson was a do-it-all guy last year. You're left with Corey Perkins, who I knew was a nice facilitator with about 3 assists per contest, but that said, he's not a guy that's really going to give you a lot of scoring. You do have Ponce James back, and with Ponce, he was a Poncation, shooting 44% from three-point range, but that was on a small sample size. He was only averaging about 4 points per contest, and it's a Delaware State team that they're going to be unable to really take advantage of the lack of size with Niagara, because they don't really have anyone that's above like 6'6", 6'7", that's currently in their rotation. So I do think that for Niagara, just with this matchup in general, even though you do have Zion Bethea, who's been a pretty rock-solid scorer throughout his career, whether that be at Delaware, whether that be at Pepperdine last year, he's putting in there about 7.5 points per contest. I do think that this Niagara team finds a way to get the job done under a guy in Greg Paulus, who I just think is a great coach in general, and I did set my line at 9.5. I'm going to be willing to lay that number. This time I total 145.5. You've got a Delaware State team that year in and year out, they're typically in the top 100 with regards to total possessions per game, and I do think that there's going to be a lot of second and third chances to be had for both of these teams, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on that over as well. 306, 631, 306, 632. It is Georgia State, and they're going to be playing us Presbyterian. Presbyterian, an underdog of 3 points on this game, is 137.5. I set Georgia State as a 10-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. I don't understand why we've got such a low total as well. Presbyterian wasn't necessarily like a super-duper up-tempo team last season, but it's not like they were playing at a snail's pace either. With Presbyterian, they were about 294th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but he certainly gave it up defensively. Now, part of that is because they were dealing with quite a few injuries in terms of their front court and having back all their guys from 8 seasons ago. Like, you had Jalen Peterson, great name. He had to do a little bit of everything. He got thrusted into a big role. He was averaging about 5.5 to 6 rebounds per game because you had the full Jonah Pierce, who he was really doing a nice job getting the team 6+ boards in the small, less than 10 game sample size they had a season ago. But still, this is a team that they should be able to do a better job of being able to get second and third chances. And I do think that Iverson King along Tristan Wilson are going to be a nice tandem in the backcourt. Wilson was a guy that was sort of just learning behind the backcourt 8 seasons ago. Meanwhile, you've got a guy in Iverson King who last season as a freshman and as a little bit more of a part-time starter, he was able to supply the team with 44% three-point shooting, 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, with Presbyterian being outside the top 250 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That very much worked to their disadvantage. And you've got a Georgia State team that, well, you've got on the flip side a Presbyterian team that really doesn't push a lot of tempo. This has been a Georgia State team that, under Jonas Hayes, has looked to play up tempo. Now, for Georgia State, they were also a team that was outside the top 200 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They've always had a little bit of a, shall we say, hit or miss 3-point shooting effort, but that said, they were about 109th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. That was actually down from where it was 2 seasons ago, but Georgia State brings back quite a few nice pieces from a season ago that I think are really going to be able to help elevate this offense, with Jelani Hamilton being a double-figure scorer last season. He's had 39 points in the first 2 games of the season, so I like what he's bringing to the table. And then Micah Tucker, he's a guy that I think is going to be able to elevate this backcourt as well. As coming off the bench, he's given the team 14 points in the first 2 games of the season. They played a little bit of a lower-scoring slog against Cincinnati a few nights ago. I just attribute that to Cincinnati being a very much defense-oriented team, and I do think that Malachi Brown is going to be able to help give the team some nice facilitation after he began his career over at Seton Hall last season. 8 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists per game, has been relatively neutralized in the first 2 games of the season, but I think him getting it going is going to be very big. And for this Presbyterian team, they just don't do necessarily the world's greatest job of being able to force the issue in terms of ball pressure, and I do think that that allows the Georgia State team, who one of their main kryptonites has been turnovers. They've been outside the top 250 in terms of ball security the last few seasons, be able to really take hold. And this is a Presbyterian team that they as well are going to give up quite a few looks from 3-point range. Really, both of these teams I think are going to be teams that probably give you a little bit of a look from 3-point range, and I do think that that helps out a Presbyterian backcourt that last season was very unproven, and I think a lot of these guys are going to take a stride forward. Last year, Presbyterian about 213th in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. Georgia State, they were hovering more around about 137, so circumstance where I do think that you get quite a bit more scoring than a lot of people are banking on. I said my total 148. I like the over, and with Georgia State, made them the 10-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. 306, 633, 306, 634. You've got Miami, and they play us as Stetson. Stetson is a sizable underdog here of 31 points. So on this game, it is 163, and made my line 825.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Miami. I do think that they are going to be able to have a lot of promise moving forward, and I do like the fact that they brought in Jai Lucas, a guy who is a part of that just Lucas family, the John Lucas sort of second, third, all those guys. He's a part of that family, so I do think that they are going to be able to have a lot of promise moving forward. And I mean, they've got a lot of big men that come in, like an Ernest Uday, who he was over at TCU, giving you 7+ rebounds per game. Have to love the versatility that you get out of the Indiana transfer. Malik Renew, who's had 42 points in the first 2 games of the season, but I do think that they still leave a little bit of something to be desired in terms of their backcourt. The 3-point shooting is probably going to be a little bit hit or miss. Drew Washington was a 40% 3-point shooter over at New Mexico. Trey Donaldson, he was solid over at Michigan last season, but had a little bit of tendency to turn the ball over, and this is a team that's going to be based around a lot of bigs, along with the Allens and Dante Allen, along with Marcus Allen in the backcourt. And for Stetson, the one thing that this team does year in and year out, they love to shoot from 3-point range. Their defense is oftentimes very, very lackluster, but they oftentimes play at a slower pace as well. Last year, they were a little bit more of a mid-tempo team when they made the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. They were outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game. I think that Donnie Jones is going to look to get the team back to his roots a little bit. Now, they did put up 106 points against Fort Lauderdale University, but I'm not going to make too much out of that non-Division I game, but Jamie Phillips is a guy that you look to be able to elevate this team. As last season he was, as a freshman, give the team 11 points per contest, shot 37% from three, doled out 2 assists per contest, so you like what he's doing there. This is going to be a Stetson team that most likely gets plowed on the glass. You're probably looking at Alex Doyle to try to win the battle down low after he's been a guy that's been glued to the bench over the last few seasons at 6'9". They're giving him extended looks right now because they just don't have a lot else down low, but you have to figure that someone like a Jake Johnson, who is a senior, he's going to be able to help lead this backcourt. He comes in from the non-D1 ranks where he was putting in there some relatively good offense, and I do think that with the Stetson team going against the Miami bunch, that they've got a lot of new pieces that are all learning one each other as well. I do think that they're going to be able to do just enough to be able to hold in there and to be able to cover this number, so I did set my line to 25.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the points with Stetson, made my total 153.5 as well. I think that Stetson looks to slow this game down. I'm going to be in on that total under 36-635, 36-636. North Carolina A&T is playing goes to South Carolina State. South Carolina State, an underdog of 2 points. Total is 159 and made a total of 154. I'm going to be in on the under. Now, South Carolina State, year in and year out, they're a top 40 team in terms of total possessions per game. Not necessarily a team that thrives on offense. Last year, well inside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and they're going through a lot of transition. Last year, South Carolina State was able to have a top 150 defense because they had, for one, a guy in Drayton Jones who was a big-time dominator down low, and for two, they had a lot of good guys that you could utilize in a little bit of a rotation. They were able to go with hockey-style line changes, and they have to replace so much of that depth. They're going to be looking to the Wright brothers and Rennell Wright along to Shea Wright to be able to help out with that regard a little bit more. You've got Wright, who's been with the program, to Shea Wright, because they're both last name Wright, who's been with the program a few seasons. Rennell Wright, he comes in from the non-D1 ranks from a season ago, but now they're looking at James Morrow to really lead things after he was not a guy that really saw a lot of minutes last year. He was only averaging about 10 minutes per contest. He was one of the lesser guys in the rotation, and you pretty much didn't bring back anyone that was averaging more than 15 minutes from a team that had like 10 guys that were averaging 12 plus minutes per contest. So that's a big giant issue for them. And then on the other end, you've got North Carolina A&T team that they had to kick off so many of their top scorers towards the end of the season last year, but they found a defensive identity while they were doing that under Monte Ross, and now they're going to be looking to Trent Middleton to really be able to pump up this offense after last season. He was a rock solid player over at Delaware, 5.5 points per contest. He's been a career about 36% three-point shooter. 2 years ago at Ball State, shot really well from three last year, had a little bit of a down three-point shooting year over at Delaware. I think that he's going to be able to find it a little bit more, and additionally, you've got a guy in KJ DeBrick, who he comes over from Cleveland State last season, was unable to see a ton of minutes 2 seasons ago in a small sample size. He was giving that team about 4.5 points, 4.5 boards per contest. He's shown that he's able to give you a bit of versatility there. And I think that Bryson Ogletree, who's been with the program the last few seasons, but has just dealt with a whole bunch of injuries in general, he's going to be able to give you a nice little bit of a spark. He was a part-time starter when he was actually in the rotation last year. Shot only about 32% from three. North Carolina A&T over the last few seasons has been one of your lesser three-point shooting teams, and I do think that there's going to be a lot of sloppiness with both of these teams having a lot of, shall we say, change out there in the backcourt. You're going to get a lot of possessions, but I think that you get a lot of dead possessions, and in the end, I think that North Carolina A&T finds a way to be able to pull this one out with the fact that they just have a little bit more familiarity and I feel like a little bit more talent in that backcourt. I did set my line at a 154 with regards to total. I'm in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 5.5 with North Carolina A&T. 306-637, 306-638. You've got Eastern Kentucky, and they play us to Western Kentucky. In the Battle of Kentucky, it is Eastern Kentucky who finds themselves as a 1.5 point favorite, and total is 164, and this is a circumstance where I did set as a very slim favorite Western Kentucky of 2 points, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on them on the money line for Western Kentucky. They are going to play at a harebrained pace as Hank Plona, who he takes over in season number 2. He was over at the non-Division I ranks for the last few seasons prior to getting this opportunity. He's got his team just running and gunning. We saw that last season, and while he did lose a lot of players from a year ago, I like the fact that he brought in Cameron Hefner, who was a rock-solid player over at Eastern Illinois and Evansville over the last few seasons. At Evansville, was logging about 12.5 points, shot in the high 30s from 3 points. And Western Kentucky was not necessarily a great three-point shooting team a season ago, so I feel like that might be elevated by the fact that you also bring in Ryan Myers, a top scorer over at Western Illinois last year, who he, in his 2 seasons at Western Illinois, shot about 37% from 3, 13 points per contest. I really like what he brings to the table for this bunch. And Brian Selbungwe, who began his career over at Tulsa, he had a season over at Tulsa where he was averaging 12.9 rebounds per game. He should be able to uphold what you lose out of the likes of Tyrone Marshall and company down low, and they go up against an Eastern Kentucky team that has a very distinct style. Citadel. This is a team that when they're really humming under A.W. Hamilton, they're a top 40 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but they do have to try to replace a lot of the good backcourt play that you had a season ago. George Kimmel, Devontae Blanton, guys like this. They're not the full Mayor Wool. He was a nice rebounder for this team, something that Eastern Kentucky hasn't had a ton of. They've been looking to like one primary big man to be able to help out with that. Isaiah Gozart was actually one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball 2 seasons ago, and I just don't think that with this Eastern Kentucky team, you're really going to be able to have that. You're probably going to be looking at Austin Ball to be able to give you a bit of everything. He comes on over from George Mason, and in their first game against a non-Division I team, 13 points, 13 rebounds, but he's only 6'7", so you have to have a little bit of question mark there. The main guy that returns for this team is Zerner Buttrey. Buttrey, he last season about 9 points per contest, shot 40% from 3. This is very much an Eastern Kentucky team that loves to be able to bomb it from 3-point range, and additionally, you've got Juan Cranford, who began his career over at St. Francis, Pennsylvania last season, 10 points, 39.5% 3-point shooter, rock solid there. Was able to generate about a steal per game as well, but with a lot of new pieces, trying to learn this system, with having just a lot of disjointedness in general with regards to the backcourt, I just don't think that this system that typically generates the turnovers does so in this case. I think that Western Kentucky is going to also be able to win this game from within, so I did set my total at a 160. I'm liking the under, and with Western Kentucky, I'm going to take a shot on them outright on the money line. 3-6-6-39, 3-6-6-40. Charleston Southern is on the road against the Citadel. The Citadel is a 2.5-point home underdog, and total on this game, you're going to be getting it at a 145.5, and with the Citadel, I set them as a 3-point dog. I'm going to be willing to lay with Charleston Southern. The Citadel is just a wet match in a dark cave. Last year, outside the top 325 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. The good news is they retain a lot of their pieces from a season ago. The bad news is those pieces just aren't very good. So there's that. You've got Solo Abasi, who last season was able to give you about 5 rebounds per game. He should be able to give this team a little bit of a rough and tumble down low, but when you look at the backcourt, you just don't have much with this team. Keenan Davis is going to be given the keys to the car after last season. Gave the team about 9 points, 3 boards per contest, but is not too much of a facilitator, and he was dealing with major injury last year as well. So that means that you're probably going to be relying upon some of these out-of-the-blue freshmen, like a Marcos Gonzalez, who has seen some good minutes early on during the season, but they just don't have that primary guard to be able to dole out the ball, and you're going to be relying upon a lot of like 6'6", 6'7" wings to help facilitate the offense. That's just not a place where you want to be in. For Charleston Southern, I do think that Seton Nimbley has this program going in the right direction. They've got a guy that I really like in Alan Sumler, who he last season was out due to injury. 2 years ago, he was putting in there 14 points, shot about 33% from 3. Not a guy that's really going to be doling out the ball and give you a lot of facilitation, but they bring in a guy in Luke Williams, who is a very good player at the non-Division I level. He's going to be the main guy to be able to facilitate that offense, get the ball to Sumler, and I do think that things are going to be cleaned up from a Charleston Southern team that has been year in and year out outside the top 275 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis, and I do think that Charleston Southern is much improved as well with bringing in Nate Bradford, who was over at Georgia Southern the last few seasons, part-time starter the last few seasons, who he's been able to give that team right around about 3.5, 4 rebounds per game, and his career 34.5% 3-point shooter at 6'9", so he gives this team a level of versatility that they haven't had in the past, and playing against a Citadel team that just has not found a point guard thus far, I do think that Charleston Southern finds a way to get the job done. I set my line at 3, so I'm going to be willing to lay it with this Charleston Southern bunch. Made my total 145, so here at the 145.5. I just don't know if the Citadel does their part with this total. I like the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay the number here with Charleston Southern. 3-6-6-41, 3-6-6-42. It is New Orleans. They're on the road. They're facing off against LSU. LSU is an 18.5 point favorite. Total on this game between 159.5 to 160.5. And with LSU, I did make them a pretty nice size favorite here. I did make them a favorite 21.5 points. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. New Orleans, a great triumph a few days ago. We talked about that with Rocco Miller being able to take down TCU. That said, in that game against TCU shot less than 15% from 3-point range, and I just don't think that Lightning is going to be striking twice against LSU. Now, for LSU, this is a unit that under Matt McMahon, they've had a little bit of inefficiency with regards to their offense, and they do have to replace the likes of Victorious Miller and company in the backcourt, but I thought that Deaton Thomas was a really nice add over at UNLV a season ago, and he was a top 100 recruit that actually decided to go to UNLV a few seasons ago. He was logging about 15.5 points, 4.5 assists, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. He's just a nice do-it-all sort of guy that should have probably been playing high major basketball to start with New Orleans. I think that they're going to be a little bit outgunned down low, even with Churchill Abis down low. You've got Michael Michael Nwoko on the flip side for this LSU team, that he was pretty solid when he was over at Mississippi State last season. 6 points, 5 boards. He's able to give you a block per contest. Not necessarily a guy that's going to really pop off and give you a lot of offense, but he does a nice job of being able to block things down low, and that's big for this LSU team, that they look to play at a little bit of a faster style. Max McKinnon had a really nice debut for LSU, 19 points in that opening game win. He was over at Portland last year, where he was another one of those gadget guys that just did a bit of everything. Shot 40% from 3, 14 points, 4.5 boards, 3 assists, played in an up-tempo style, so I think that lends itself very well here. And this is a New Orleans team that, they are very much improved from a season ago. You bring in an actual functional point guard in Ja'Cavion Buckley, who was really good over at Southeast Louisiana a season ago. That's big. Colton Benson is one of the better just overall shooters that you're going to find in all of college basketball. Last year, over at Texas State, he averaged 10 points per contest. He, in his time over at Texas State, the 2 seasons that he spent there, shot 93% the free throw line and 42% from 3-point range, but he really doesn't do anything other than shoot it. You have to have your question marks with regards to the defense. You've got Pagonis, who he comes over as a little bit of an international man of mystery, 9.7 boards per contest, and MJ Thomas is really the lone holdover that you've got from a season ago. So I do think that this is going to be a game that's going to be cranked a little bit more up tempo. I did set my total here at a 157. I think that we've got a skoge a bit too high, because you do guys still have a New Orleans team in a little bit of transition, and I do think that LSU is better on the glass than they have been in past seasons. So I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under, and I'm willing to lay it here with LSU. 3-6, 643, 3-6, 644. TCU plays us to Lamar. Lamar is a 17.5 point dog total on this game. It is 146.5, and with TCU, I said that is a 17.5 point favorite. So we're going to be waiting on a little bit of line movement here. This was a game that it opened up with a few 17s out there. If we could get back to a 17, I'm going to be willing to lay with TCU. TCU, obviously, that rough loss, as I was just mentioning, to New Orleans to begin the season. They bounced back night number 2, and they were able to take care of business when they were going against St. Francis of Pennsylvania. That was a 39-point win, and for TCU, they look better on offense than they were a season ago when they were outside the top 330 in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. You bring in Loteris Lavicius, who at 6'7" last year over at Oregon State was shooting about 40% from 3. Jaden Pierre is a nice guy in the backcourt who began his career over at Providence last year, 12 points, mid-30s 3-point shooter, is able to give you 3 assists per game. TCU just had a Murphy's Law night against New Orleans a few nights ago where they went, I think it was like 3 of 22 from 3-point range. It was below 15% from 3, and David Punch, he should be able to pair up very well down low with so many of the other 6'7", 6'8" guys like Xavier Edmonds and company. This team is always rough and tumble when it comes to this Jamie Dixon style, and for Lamar, this has become a very respectable team. Like Lamar last year was able to get to 20-plus points out there in the Southland. Alvin Brooks is doing a great job with this program, and they do bring back a few guys in Andrew Holyfield along Cody Penbaker. Penbaker was a little bit more of a this and that guy last season. Was a starter that averaged about 7 points, 4 boards, a steal per contest. Really doesn't light it up from 3-point range, but just gives this team what they need. And then Andrew Holyfield, he had 6'10", is actually a career 38% 3-point shooter that logs about 10.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. So you got good versatility there. This is a team that is very much built down low. You've got someone like a Braden Isu saying 6'9". Spencer Iwazaro, he's able to give you some nice rebounding at about 6'9". He doesn't give you a lot of offense, though, and I do think that that's going to be the issue for Lamar. Other than Penbaker, you really don't have a ton of offense. They're going to be looking at Rob Lee to have the ball in his hands quite a bit after he comes over from the non-D1 ranks. He was a guy that was able to do a really nice job in terms of facilitating at the lower level, but now going up against TCU, I do think that this game is going to be slowed down a little bit more, so I total 143.5. I like the under, and with TCU, willing to lay up to 17 with them. 3-6, 645, 3-6, 646. You've got Holy Cross on the road against Utah. Utah's a 20.5 point favorite. 154.5 is the total. Set Utah's a 22.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. Now with Utah, they got pushed to overtime against Weber State a few days ago, and you tell that Alex Jensen, who comes on over from the NBA ranks, he's got a little bit to learn about the just style in general of college basketball, but Terrence Brown had himself 30-plus points in that game in which he was able to really bail the team out against Weber State, and he was a 20-point-per-game scorer 2 seasons ago over at Fairleigh Dickinson, so you'll love what he's able to bring to the table. I think that Seydou Traore, who began his career over at Manhattan and Iowa, is going to fit this system very well as well. With Traore, stands about 6'7", not an amazing 3-point shooter, and Utah is probably going to leave a little bit of something to be desired from 3-point. I actually got bailed out a few nights ago against Weber State thanks to their 3-point shooting, but I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a mainstay for them moving forward because you're relying upon someone like Aquino Dawes, who he was very solid for the team last year. He's one of the main holdovers from last year, mid-30s 3-point shooter, but 8.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. You've got a lot of stretchability and you've got a lot of size with regards regards to this team. Meanwhile, for Holy Cross, this team, they were a top 12 team in the country last year in terms of three-point shooting. They also were dead last in the country in terms of being able to get to the free throw line. They just got completely dump trucked up against BYU a few nights ago, and I did think that it might be rough for them on this road trip. You have to travel from the great state of Massachusetts on over to Elevation at Utah. That's not easy, and while they do retain someone like Joe Nugent, who he last season as a 6'6" combo player, 12.5 points, shot 43% for three-point range. You've got someone like Tyler Ballison, who he had a small sample size last year of 10 games. He actually shot 81% from three in that small sample size. I only think that he shot like 11 threes or something like that, but obviously a guy that's able to light it up from three, but you have like no rebounding whatsoever with this team. I think that Utah is just going to really try to take the fight to them on the inside. I think that they're going to be very successful with that. This is also a Holy Cross team that they just don't necessarily play with a lot of tempo. They were outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game last year, a bottom 30 team in terms of their offensive rebound percentage, and they were a team that they really gave it up on the inside. I think that for Utah, they do find a way to be able to win from within, and because there's going to be a little bit of a lack of three-point shooting in this game, I think that Utah is just going to cut off the arc from Holy Cross that keeps this game under. So by total 152.5, like the under, and I'm willing to lay up to 22 here with Utah. 306-647, 306-648. You've got Georgia Tech. They play with Southeast Louisiana. Sela is a underdog of 15 points. 141 is the total, and set Georgia Tech as a 12.5 point favor. Going to be able to take those points with Southeast Louisiana. We saw Georgia Tech have a very good effort against Bryan when they played against Maryland Eastern Shore to begin the season. They got pushed to overtime in that game. So we've got two very different data sets from the two games that we have seen there, but I do think that Southeast Louisiana just flat out is a relatively solid defensive-minded team. Now, losing Brody Woodbury, who is a 6'11" big man that was able to clog things up down low, that's big, but you bring in Isaiah Gaines, and Isaiah Gaines was a nice big man over at Radford last season where he was able to give the team 5 rebounds. Didn't necessarily give them a lot of production on the offensive side of things, but he's able to be a nice defense-oriented guy. And then you bring back CJ Booker along Jeremy Alizi from a season ago. Alizi was putting in there about 10 points per contest. Again, not a guy that's going to light you up from three-point range. CJ Booker probably going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit after last season. He only gave the team about an assist and a half per contest when he was over at UT Rio Grande Valley 2 seasons ago. Saw a little bit more run at the point guard spot. I think that now with Kavion Buckley heading on over to New Orleans, leaving that void at the point guard spot, he's going to be seeing a little bit more there, but you also bring in Jalen Forrest. So it's been very well traveled. Began his career over at Presbyterian at Chicago State last year, 12.5 points. He was able to shoot about 31.5% from three-point range, but he pulled in there about 4.5, 5 rebounds per game as a 6'4", just a little bit of a bowling ball style guard. I think that he's going to be able to add quite a bit of something for this team as well. And then you've got Obang Abi-Itam, who 2 seasons ago over at Central Arkansas was averaging 7 rebounds per game. Really not a lot of offensive game to his overall repertoire, and they're going to need that against Georgia Tech because you've got Bate Ndongo, who at 6'9", he's got relatively good versatility, career mid-33 point shooter that's able to give you 8+ rebounds per game. And Kawasi Reeves has been in the system for quite a bit of time. Kawasi Reeves last season, 9.5 points, shot only about 28% for three, but his career more around about 32% three-point shooter. I think that he's going to be a little bit better from the outside than he was a season ago. And then Cam Kraft, 40% three-point shooter coming over from Miami of Ohio, is going to be big. With Georgia Tech, though, they lose that main point guard and Nathan George, who is able to do a nice job of being able to flow good, clean offense. That's the reason why Georgia Tech has looked very out of sorts here to begin the season offensively. And I do think that this is the sort of spot where we are going to be seeing Georgia Tech be able to have a little bit more offensive success against the Southeast Louisiana team that they do a nice job on the interior, but they'll give up a few looks from three-point range. I did set a line at a 12.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Southeast Louisiana, and I'm in on the over as well. So I total 144.5, and then we wrap things up with 306-649, 306-650. UCLA plays us at West Georgia. West Georgia is an underdog of 34 points, and your total is 150. So UCLA is a 32.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the 34 with West Georgia. West Georgia had a relatively rough run of things in season number 1, the Division I ranks, but they did retain their top scorer in Sheldon Williams-Dryden. He's a 6'6", do-it-all sort of player that last year he shot about 31.5% from three, 17.5 points, 7.5 boards, steal per contest. I really like his overall game. Now, pretty much everything else is new look. Kyrick Davis, who is a 10-point per game scorer out there in the backcourt, they lose him, but bringing Colton Griffin, who he last season was able to give the team about 9.5 points per contest, and he was able to do a good job in terms of being able to grab like 4.5 boards, a pair of assists per contest, nice versatility. He's going to be able to help elevate this team. You don't have a lot of size outside of the 6'6" Dryden. You have to figure that Xavier Daniel, he's probably going to be seeing a lot of run this season after he was a relatively solid player over at Austin P a few seasons ago. Just was unable to see a ton of minutes last season, and he was dealing with injury over his 2 seasons over at Austin P, so he should be able to give this team a little bit of something. Cameron Merritt is a guy that comes over from Georgia, but I'm not sure if he's going to be seeing a lot of minutes this season as he was relatively glued to the bench last year. And then on the flip side, you've got a UCLA bunch that they got pushed in that first game against Eastern Washington, but this is going to be one of the better backcourts in all of college basketball. Probably going to play a little bit more up-tempo under Donovan Dent. He was part of a New Mexico team that was in the top 40 in terms of total possessions per game. He's filling out 6+ assists per contest, guy that just does it all. But you bring back the Daly Show and Eric Daly along with Tyler Billadu. Both of these guys stand 6'8" and 6'9". They're both able to light it up from 3-point range, and with adding in their Xavier Booker, a guy that at 6'11" was a former top 25 recruit, just really couldn't find his footing over at Michigan State, but he's another one of these big guys that is able to shoot it from 3-point range. That gives UCLA all sorts of versatility, all sorts of size, but they do need to figure themselves out a little bit more and just find that true identity. I think that Mick Cronin is going to do that, but I think that he's going to utilize these first few games as a little bit of experimentation. How do you want to use Sky Clark in tandem with Donovan Dent? Because it appears as though Dent is going to be that main facilitator now. You bring in Steven Jamerson as well, relatively solid big man over at San Diego. How do you disperse those minutes? So I do think that in a game of experimentation for UCLA, that allows West Georgia to do just enough to be able to hold in there. Semi-line at 32.5. Won't take those plays with West Georgia, and I'm in on the under, and that'll wrap things up for the Monday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Rocco Miller, who does amazing work over at Bracketeer.org. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from his fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.